Okay. Kind of whatever. You look on it, yeah?
Our
Shabbos is the Chazar. The Rebbe, my time of Shana B'Shana, according to Rebbe, what does he learn out from Kol Shana B'Shana? I'm continuing in the Gemara.
Hey Rob, how's it going?
Are
Are you muted? I can't hear you.
So this situation is different because it's not possible to have the walled
Ralph, can you
cities
hear me?
be after the
I hear you
regular
now.
cities.
There we go.
And if we don't move the walled city, meaning like there's a hierarchy, I guess. It's
Are we
not
on?
like,
Yeah, Ralph.
and therefore we
can
had
hear
to
you.
move the
Yeah.
regular cities.
Who's the
earlier.
background?
Yeah, we had to move the regular cities earlier.
Who is that?
Right. So
Who
therefore
is
we
that?
had to make the
What's going
regular
on?
the big cities earlier so that we can make the new coffin on Erev Shabbos. Meaning
What
he's
is
trying to
happening?
time making the big cities before
Ralph,
the walled
all right,
cities.
can you hear us?
He's less worried about.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I can hear you.
But who else is with
meaning
us?
that's what I was
It's
saying.
Matt
Like a
Marks,
hierarchy.
apparently.
And what's the noise I'm hearing in the back?
Okay.
Like-
That's just someone else talking. I'm gonna mute
Chaburah,
myself.
the
Uh-huh. Okay, so we on? Okay, so we're starting Sefer Shoftim? Okay, let's go. So, a couple of words before we start about the nature of Sefer Shoftim is that Sefer Shoftim is a book that describes like roughly 370 years of history in Eretz Yisrael, okay? And, hey, who's that? What's going on? Yaakov Levy. What am I supposed to do to him now?
He's fine. He can hear you.
Ah, hello.
Hey, Rav Shai.
Howdy. Okay, so can we start? I'm just gonna talk and I don't care what you guys have to say. All right, so a couple of things before we start Sefer Shoftim. Sefer Shoftim roughly covers 370 years of Jewish history in Eretz Yisrael. It is basically a book about a time period. If the book of Sefer Yeshua described the transition from the desert to Eretz Yisrael, from being a nomadic nation to being a settled nation of farmers, so Sefer Shoftim is describing the ongoing life of roughly 370 years between the death of Yeshua ben Nun and the establishment of the Melucha. Anybody with me? Can anyone hear me?
I'm here.
Ah, okay, good. That's because I can't see you guys for some reason. All right, so that's point number one. Point number two is the famous structure of Sefer Shoftim is that the Jews sinned and God punished them, and some dude came in, took over, made it better, and then he dies. Jews go back to sinning. Okay, that's the classical Shoftim structure story. But there are two other types of hanhaga, of leadership. The two other hanhagas are leadership of not a person, but of a tribe, a tribal leadership, meaning there were two dominant tribes in at that time period. The one up north were Beis Yosef, and to be more specific, Ephraim. And the ones down south were Yehuda. Now, Yehuda is mostly not going to show up in Sefer Shoftim. We're going to see him now at the beginning, but we're not going to see them all the way up to the end of Sefer Shoftim, when the conflict with the Plishtim starts. Okay? But Sefer Yehuda is generally out of the stories of Sefer Shoftim, the whole structure of sinning, Goyim taking over, like doing tshuva, some shofar coming back, that structure is not going to happen to Shevet Yehuda. So that's another issue. Now there's a different type of hanhaga of a shofet. Those shoftim, that their claim to fame was not based on their military accomplishments, meaning some sort of a war, but rather on the fact that they were very well connected in terms of a family. They somehow took over through being key people. Yeah, what, where, when? I guess someone just asked a question. I don't know. Whatever. Okay. All right, so we're starting with the Sefer. ויחר מות יהושע וישאלו בני ישראל בהשם לאמור מי יעלנו הכנעני בתחילה להילחם בו. Now, Sefer Yehoshua, which is basically 14 years, just described the basic conquest. Now, the basic conquest was not enough. If you read Sefer Yehoshua, you get the impression that everything was great. We took over the entire land, and things are really working out great for us. When you look at Sefer Shoftim, you don't get that impression at all. Now, in order to explain the gap, that's the gap between conquering, kibush, and Yerusha, meaning clearing out. The thing that was not done at the times of Yehoshua bin Nun, for the lack of enough time, was to clear out the Canaanites. And since they were not cleared out, so they made a comeback. And Sefer Shoftim is basically a description of the comeback of the Knaanim taking over. Hey, Matt Marks.
Hey.
Okay, so now I'll give a mashal about this, a personal story that demonstrates this very well. When I was roughly 11 years old, which was basically when there were still dinosaurs running around. So a friend of mine's parents were looking for a sink. Their sink broke. We were two 11-year-old kids. So his parents gave us money. We took a cab to an Arab village right outside Yerushalayim to buy a sink, because that was the cheapest place to get a sink. Okay, two 11-year-olds were able to do that pre-Intifada, 1987, which means the Arabs were still afraid of Jews, so two 11-year-olds were able to walk into an Arab village on their own and go back with an Arab cab driver, no problems. Once the Arab made their comeback in the form of the Intifada, that was no longer possible and still is not possible. But that's, now Sefer Shoftim is describing not my first time in that Arab village, but my second time in the same Arab village as a Miluim guy, carrying a gun and looking around to see if nobody wants to shoot me. Okay, so basically, this is the reality that we're dealing with. Now we hear of the idea, I mentioned the idea that there were dominant tribes and there were a little less dominant tribes. So this is the first time we're going to encounter that thing in Tanakh, and that is Vaishalu bnei Israel, Vayomer Hashem Yehuda Ya'aleh, Hinei natati et haaretz beyado. Now that is very accurate, because Shevet Yehuda was the most thorough in terms of conquering his piece of land from the Knaanim. Yehuda did not have any Knaanim in their Nachla. Okay. Now Yehuda approaches Shimon, which was a weaker Shevet, and invites him over to go to war. And indeed, they go to war together. Now, the relationship between Yehuda and Shimon are going to last all the way up to David HaMelech's times. In David HaMelech's times, we're going to find in Sefer Divrei Yamim that Shimon, which was settled inside Yehuda territory, is going to be kicked out by Yehuda and had to look for a different place. Okay, but the relationship between Yehuda and Shimon starts here in these psukim. Okay, so the first person that they're attacking is they're attacking Bezek. Now, we're not really sure where Bezek is. There are a couple of suggestions, but it's a little bit unclear. But bottom line is they are able to conquer Bezek. Okay, and once they do, they capture the local king, then they chop off his fingers, and he is doing some kind of a tziduk hadin. He justifies that for the way he was acting towards other leaders, and he's brought to Yerushalayim, being killed. And וילחמו בני יהודה בירושלים וילכדו אותה ויכו לפי חרב ואת העיר שלחו באש. Now Yerushalayim is a city which was, in terms of its location, the border between Nachlas Yehuda and Nachlas Binyamin. Now, for Chazal explained the fact that Yerushalayim was not taken over with some sort of an early political deal between Avimelech and what's his name and Avraham Avinu, which was preventing the Jews from taking over Yerushalayim. But nevertheless, the city was burned down, abandoned, and it was left like that from the perspective of the Jews. It could be that Bnei Yehuda also left because it was expected that Bnei Binyamin should inhabit the city. Whatever the case may be, is Yerushalayim's conquest was very temporary, it didn't last, and that was basically the only thing which Shevet Yehuda did not do the way they were supposed to do. Everything else, when there's a description of the way all these Shvatim did their part of conquering Eretz Yisrael, so Shevet Yehuda is mentioned first on the list as the ones who basically did their job well. We're going to see that later. Okay, so now Bnei Yehuda are basically taking over their land, and from Yerushalayim they go all the way down south, because Yerushalayim is the northern borders of Nachlas Yehuda. It's the northest that Nachlas Yehuda gets to. They go from there all the way down south to the people of
How you doing, Ralph?
Hello? Anybody? Something just happened.
What did you say?
Benjamin
can
says
hear
hello.
Peace. What's up? How you doing? Okay, so now this piece of story is, in fact, did not take place here. The story that we just read is part of Sefer Yeshua. It says that the 4 giants were killed, and that happened in Sefer Yeshua as well. When that happened under Kalev. Now, Kalev was quite a dude. At the age of 85, he was still able to be leading a war, and he did that job. Now, there's something important about the fact that the 4 giants were killed by him. If we go back to an old sin that the Jews had, the sin of the Meraglim. The sin of the Meraglim was the direct cause for not getting Eretz Yisrael at the time. Okay, now, there were 2 tribes that did not participate in the sin. Ephraim in the form of Yoshua bin Nun, and Yehudah in the form of Kalev ben Yefuneh. Now, part of that had to do with the fact that there were giants. If you remember, the Meraglim said, "Oh, we saw these giants. They're impossible. We can't deal with those guys. There's nothing we could do about it." Now, what happens is that Shevet Yehudah are the ones who are going to take over the giants and going to solve that problem. And it starts here when the giants in Kiryat Arba are killed. And the one who's going to finish the job completely is, in fact, going to be David HaMelech when he kills Goliath. So that's like a running theme, how Shevet Yehudah, the reason it was a dominant Shevet in terms of holding Eretz Yisrael is because they did not participate in Chet HaMeraglim, A, and B, they were metakim Chet HaMeraglim of other Shvatim by killing the giants. And this is where that process begins. Okay, next. The next story appears twice. It appears here and it appears in Sefer Yeshua. And on the surface, it looks like a very strange story. Kalev promises that whoever takes over Kiryat Sefer gets his daughter Achsa, in English Roxanne. And okay, so Othniel ben Knaz manages to do that. Oh, great. They're supposed to get married. And then she says to her husband, "Please ask my dad for a field." And then she drops off the donkey, and her dad asks, "What's going on?" She says, "Well, there's no water." And he says, "Okay, take some water." On the surface, this seems to be a very random story. And all the more so, why is it so important to the Tanakh to mention it twice? So the answer is the following. One of the crucial questions that was asked from the times of the desert all the way up to here is, what is going to be the nature of Jewish existence in Eretz Yisrael? Now, that nature could be one of two. They could either be farmers or they could be shepherds. Now, there were these tribes that asked to remain shepherds. Those tribes remained on the other side of the Jordan River. What's going to be here? Now, Drom Har Hebron is an area that can go both ways. It can go both ways. So now what Achsa here does is she is asking for a field. Now, which means the people, the inhabitants of that area are going to be from now on supposed to be farmers and not shepherds. Okay, like it sounds like pretty strange or also not so significant, but the idea of shepherds versus farmers is a running theme in Tanakh too. That takes us all the way back to Cain v'Hevel and all sorts of stories like that. Now here, that's the choice that she's making. And in fact, the same area of Kalev is going to be taken over much later in David HaMelech's times. And there's a dude who's going to be called Navalach Carmeli, who's going to live in that area. He's going to be the local sheriff. And his basic thing was, in fact, raising sheep. Okay, so, but the idea that this is an area that was given to Kalev And the reason it was given to Kalev, or the conditions were, this is Kalev's land and it's supposed to be a farmed area. Okay? So that's like another issue that right now we just get a glimpse, but when you get to Sefer Shmuel, we'll see the full story about the sheriff, Navala Carmeli, we'll be able to close that circle too. Okay. The next thing that we see here is Bnei Keni, Choten Moshe, Alu Me'eretz Marim, את בני יהודה מדבר יהודה אשר בנגב ערד וילך וישב את העם. Okay, so this is a story about the descendants of Yisrael. The descendants of Yisrael is part of Eretz Yisrael as a deposit. As a
Rav,
yeah.
since it's just us, you want to go to where we were?
That's
What?
a serious
Since it's just us, do you just want to go to where we were?
Oh, it's just us?
I
Everybody else
guess.
left.
Hey,
Anybody else?
I don't know.
Okay.
We were by Aleph Chafav, Vayelech Ha'ish Eretz Hachitim, Vayaven Ir, Vaikra Shema Luz.
Who is that?
What?
Who was
That was
that?
me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but who were you talking to?
I was talking to you.
Oh, okay.
We were by Aleph Chavav.
Yeah, so we just, okay. All right, Aleph Chavav. All right, okay. So, V'lo Harish Menashe, this is where we're supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
We just finished the guy who was the Rachav's whatever, compatible. And now we're into the other tribes. So the list of the other tribes is again going to go from the ones who did their job and the ones who didn't do.
Sorry, having some camera trouble.
Where are you sitting anyway?
Oh, Beit Al.
Oh, it's Beit Sam. Wait a minute, this is Rav Ginsburg's classroom?
No. This is Rav Wiesner's shirim.
Oh. Okay, all right, so the list starts with Menashe, because after Yehuda, we go to Beis Yosef. Now, Beis Yosef has two branches, Menashe and Ephraim. Menashe is the oldest, we're going to start from him. So, after we had said that Yehuda did everything apart from Yerushalayim, which was abandoned, but it's not enforced yet in a second. Now we're going to talk about Menashe. Menashe lo horish et Beit She'an ve'et bnoteha ve'et Ta'anach ve'et bnoteha ve'et yoshvei Dor ve'et bnoteha ve'et yoshvei Evalam ve'et bnoteha ve'et yoshvei Megiddo ve'et bnoteha ve'yoel ha'kna'ani l'shevet ba'aretz hahi. That's it. Okay. Now this is a list of cities which were very, very powerful places. Beit Shan still exists up till these days, and Beit Shan was still a stronghold against the Jews all the way up to the times of Sefer Shmuel, the times of Shalom Melech. So that's Beit Shan. After that, we have Ta'anach and Megiddo, which were very big fortified cities, and Dor. There's a place called Dor on the seashore, which was a Nain seaport in Eretz Yisrael.
Where exactly?
It still has a name called Dor. You can still visit it. It's a place where they found a huge factory of tchelis, actually.
Oh, that's where they found the chilazon. That's so cool.
Yeah. So that's Dor.
So if I just search like door, it'll pop up?
Yeah, for sure. And Dor is
right on the beach.
Yeah.
Above Caesarea and Zichron Yaakov.
Right.
Very cool.
Right, and so that's Dor, and it gets even better. It was a main city in the Canaanite era, and there's a book that I couldn't get my hands on, but there's a book called Dor Hamolechet Bayamim or something like that, and there's a nice little marine archaeology museum there. Okay, so this is Menashe. Now, one of the things to also know about Sefer Shoftim that in many respects, Sefer Shoftim describes like a long process, which is the next pasuk. Vayehi ki chazak Yisrael vayasem et haknani lemas vehoresh lo rishon. So as time went by, and the Jews became a stronger element than the Knaanim, so they weren't strong enough, or they weren't motivated enough to wipe the Knaanim out, but they were strong enough to make sure that the Knaanim pays them taxes. And as you know, if you offer a Jew money, he's gonna.
Absolutely. Oh, by the way, I saw there's a pic. I took a picture of the kotel. It was like totally empty. And someone told me that the first verse of Eicha would go along really, really well with it. So I looked it up, and sure enough, we have the word lamas there, and I knew what it was because I learned it here.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I was like, because my mom actually, I sent it to my mom, and I'm like, look at this like picture, look at this like, I'm like, this is so like accurate still, and like it's awesome, not awesome, but like it's very accurate. And she's like, what's lamas? She like had no clue. She's like I even translated it out, and so I had to explain. I'm like debtor, and she goes debtor. My mother's a very smart person, you know, and she I don't know, but it was very funny because I knew what it was.
All right, so that's Menashe. Now we have Ephraim. Ephraim lo rishat HaKanani yeshet beGezer. Now Gezer is also a very key place in Eretz Yisrael. That's where they found an ancient calendar and the oldest, I think, Hebrew letters of the ancient Hebrew were found there. And again, this is only going to be solved in Sefer Malachim. Even David HaMelech is not going to take over Gezer. Gezer, Shlomo Melech has present. Okay, so that's Ephraim. Now Zvulun, lo harishat yoshvei Kidron, vet yoshvei Nahalol. Again, now over here they're not describing like the process where Zvulun becomes the deal Asher lo rishat yoshvei Yaakov et yoshvei Tzidon vet Achlav vet Achzi vet Chilva vet Afik vet Rechov. Now there's several places in Tanakh called Rechov. Now here it sounds that Asher was actually more passive in terms of
they dwelled within the territory of the Plishtim,
and not the other way around, right?
Interesting.
Naftali lo horish et yoshvei Beit Shemesh ve'et yoshvei Beit Anat. וישב בקרב הכנעני יושבי הארץ, ויושבי בית שמש ובית ענת היו להם למס. So Naphtali again was unable now. There's two Beit Shemesh. There's Beit Shemesh HaGlilit and Beit Shemesh in Yehuda. Same way that there are two Beit Lechems. So they were unable to take over these cities. Both these cities, the name contains a pagan like Yesod, like Beit Shemesh and Beit Anat. Anat is a Canaanite goddess. וישב בקרב הכנעני יושבי הארץ ויושבי בית שמש ובית ענת היו להם למס. So it could be that this pasuk is describing a little more complicated deal, that Naphtali was the minority amongst the Canaanim, but nevertheless, some Canaanim paid the That's one reading. The other reading would be that the Naphtali was inferior in terms of culture, and the Canaanim were inferior in terms of power. But whoever holds the culture has a lot of power, in fact. So that's the other possible reading of the pasuk. Ve'ilchatzu ha'emori et bnei dan ha'ara ki lo natnu laredet la'emek. ויואל האמורי לשבת בהר חרס באילון ירושלים, ותכבד יד בית יוסף ויהיו למס, וגבול האמורי ממעלה עקרבים מסלע ומעלה. Now this is something really, really interesting, because usually at the end of Sefer Shoftim, we're going to hear that Shevet Dan was being oppressed by the Plishtim. But at this point of history, the Plishtim did not make it to Eretz Yisrael yet. The Plishtim came to Eretz Yisrael in two waves. Wave number one, the ancient Plishtim, came in at the times of Avram Avinu. They were settled in the Negev. The next group of Plishtim came a little later. Now, it sounds like the Plishtim were still not conflicting with Bnei Dan at this point, and the Amoreim were the ones. Now, the Amoreim were weaker than Beis Yosef, but they were still able to prevent Bnei Dan to get settled, and which is one of the reasons that at the end of the Sefer, we're going to see this people from Dan going to look for a Nachala. There's a big discussion. What happened to the original Nachla of Dan? So Chazal understood that Dan had two Nachlas, one here and one up north. The Malbim and a lot of modern historians claim that no, Dan never took his Nachla down south, only the one up north. So whatever the case is, that's the, okay, so just to summarize what we had in the first parak. So what we had is, we had the Hanhaga of the tribes. By the way, Yehuda Yalen was, some people talk about, Rashi talks about the fact that it was an actual shofet, not just the tribes, but we said that this is where the relationship between Yehuda and Shimon began. That's issue number one. Issue number two, the destruction of the Anakim in Hebron, and those Anakim made it all the way to the Plishti cities. That's something that Yehuda solved as part of Tikkun Chet HaMarag. And the next thing is the transition from being shepherds to being settled. Okay, and then we
I have to run now, but we'll pick up with Perek Bet tomorrow.
Yeah. Now, could we make tomorrow 9 to 10? Because 10 to 11, I think I have Romanu Hess.
Yeah, sure. I'll switch.
Okay, fine.
Yes,
All right.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Peace.